Could you please join me in welcoming Professor John Munro?
It is great to see everyone again. With today's session and with the next two sessions, we're really keen to, by the end of the third session, to have moved as far as we can in terms of how we can best implement what we've been looking at in teaching practice. And if we were going to try to imagine what would be the outcomes we'd be wanting after our third session, it would be a really as clear as we can be about what we would be doing in schools to have the literacy, the numeracy, and the management aspects more in place, more happening by the end of term 3, say, than they are now. So that's really where we're wanting to go with this. And the focus of today's session is on one aspect of that. But if we want to have a vision or a goal for where we're going, that's the goal that I'm coming from. So we're not going to rehash the literacy content very much at all today. It's really going to be a focus on how we actually do it in our teaching. There are one or two points I'd like to mention at the outset that we really should keep in mind as we go through our discussion today, and also for the next 2 days. As teachers, we communicate with students and we communicate with our colleagues through the things that we do. We communicate through what we say, when we pause, the body language we use, the words. We communicate through our actions, and I'm using the word action, as you can see, in a really broad way. But we really need to keep that in mind all the way through with all of our discussion. It's what we do. In my mind, I may have a whole lot of ideas and views about either a child or a group of children or a colleague with whom I'm working. Thank God sometimes people can't see those, but no, that's not right. Well, it is right sometimes, but it's the actions that I use that are the things that communicate meaning. And we need to bear this in mind when we're talking about communicating the ways of thinking that we're wanting with the literacy. And I was just talking with Giovanna about, in terms of where, say, Thornbury is wanting to go. And the issue that, Giovanna, you mentioned was the need to make explicit what it is that we're doing. Now, Giovanna's coming from a secondary context, but it's exactly the same in a primary context. The notion of being explicit is going to be very important for what we're talking about today. I'll come back to that more a bit later as we go through. But this notion of how do we communicate with students is going to be very important for us. Now, a lot of you know I spend a lot of time in schools, and I see lots of interactions between students and teachers and students and students. And I see feedback being manipulated in a range of ways. We need to be very, very clear on the feedback that we're using, on when and how we say things, how many words we use. I'm not saying become paranoid about it, but I'm saying we need to be very clear on how we do those things. Not only do we need to be very clear in terms of the students with whom we're working, but for you also with your colleagues. Because it's going to be through your knowledge that these ideas are going to be embedded in your schools. And one key issue for us today is how do we go about positioning best your knowledge in your school at this point. And so a second key aspect of our discussion today is not going to be about literacy, but it's going to be about literacy in the context of your school. We can't see the literacy knowledge outside of your school context. So we really need to look at knowledge in context. Again, some of you know I'm one of those dreadful people, psychologists, who are very analytic and really carve things up, and I guess I do. But we have to carve things up in particular contexts. And when psychology goes really wrong is when it doesn't take on board the context or the culture. You know, you've lost it if you believe that the same human practices can go on across a whole range of contexts. We have to take on board the context. So I've said the importance of being explicit through our behaviours, through our language, through our actions, through our gestures and so on. And the second really important thing is that we keep those in context, because that's going to be one of the real underpinning things for our discussion today. The third thing I should mention, I've got jet lag. I came back from Europe on Sunday, and it's really hit with a bang. And so some of you guys know me well enough to tell me to wind it up if I'm not, because one of the things it seems to do is knock your thinking. In terms of today's discussion, I wanted to come at the embedding from the approach of you embedding the literacy teaching in your practice, because I want to argue that if you get it working well in your practice, you're then more able to move it out to other people. You're more able to have other people see what you're doing. I didn't want to get too academic, particularly in our first discussion, and I didn't include this, what I'm going to show you, in today's notes. I was going to leave it till next time. But some of you have heard me talk about this before anyway. But I'll mention it now, and bear in mind that we're going to really pursue this model of looking at knowledge more in the next two sessions. If someone were to ask me, what does my knowledge as a teacher of literacy look like? So what does my knowledge look like? So Helen, if I said to you, this has been really mean, describe someone's literacy knowledge as a teacher. It's not easy, is it? If I say to anyone, oh, well, go on, have a go.
Yeah, I mean, it's about understanding what literacy is in the first place.
Good. That's one aspect, is what it is. If I can't see a student's literacy behaviours, if I don't know what literacy actually looks like, it's harder for me to target in my teaching. And so one aspect of my knowledge as a teacher of literacy is, first of all, what does literacy knowledge actually look like? And bearing in mind what I was saying about behaviours, it's really what will children be doing when they're doing literacy. That's one aspect of it, isn't it? If I can't see that, the arrows I'll be firing could be missing the mark. An expression people don't tend to understand overseas to the same extent as we do is one we use, and we sometimes put in another word, when we say we're spitting into the wind. If I can't see someone's literacy knowledge, and it's exactly the same with numeracy, it's exactly the same with me being a chemistry teacher in 66. If I can't see a person's knowledge, I don't know where they are. I'm missing the mark, possibly. So one key aspect of my knowledge as a literacy